Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
I don't know about you, but I am on very minimal sleep. Having to write a hot take after last night.
I am on. I'm on maximal sleep because I'm in California, and so even though I was up late, it was like 9 o'clock when I went to bed. So,
very, very jealous.
And then let me just the caveat: love the wife, love the kids, but they weren't here, so I slept in.
Hey, you get no judgment from me. But so I had a piece in the queue for Politico. I don't think it's up yet. But I initially wrote something for a preview of New Hampshire, essentially, which then got held for after New Hampshire. So I did, 2 all-nighters trying to get this done. And so if I'm not my coherent, intelligible self, that is why.
Well, you're a hardworking journalist, Bill, and I think we all admire and respect that. And there is something to be said for, when you're a little bit tired, you know this stuff deep down, and so it will maybe we'll get a more unvarnished version of New Hampshire than ever.
Now, while I'm writing, I'm engaging on Twitter, which is sort of half procrastination and half part of the job, because it does actually help with trying to flesh out thoughts.
I feel like you stepped up your Twitter game in the last year, and I like it. I put it up there with you're doing analysis. It's like a Steve Kornacki kind of thing.
I try. I don't get paid the Steve Kornacki bucks, but I try.
Well, that does.
But one back and forth I got into late last night was, do we say that Bernie is the front runner right now?
Oh, the problem I have here is that you got into this with my boss. So he's right. Let's be honest.
So the argument that Bernie is the front runner is that he got the most votes in the first 2 contests. The one point I made on Twitter was, as it stands today, Buttigieg has more delegates. It's 2 more delegates. It's not in any stretch an enormous delegate lead. But when the name of the game is delegates, how do you take that off the table? I would say they are both front runners at this point.
Well, I'll give you my honest opinion. I think Bernie is, but imagine Pete Buttigieg, we'll say came in second by 2 percentage points, right? What if he had won? I mean, I know this is not having this sort of alternate reality seems maybe a little bit not the thing to do the day after a big New Hampshire, but just imagine if Pete Buttigieg had won, just had gotten a couple more points in New Hampshire, he would then be very clearly the front runner.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we would be talking about this race being completely different, dramatically different.
Now, this is the theme, or actually this relates to what I have in the queue at Politico. Well, why is it that Buttigieg didn't clean up in New Hampshire? Obviously, he did very well. He ties Bernie as far as the delegates he takes home from New Hampshire. But you're right, he did not consolidate the moderate lane the way Bernie has consolidated largely the left lane. So what accounts for this divide among moderates? And what I put out there is, it's not a policy dispute. Mm-hmm. It's not like there's a divide between Bernie and Warren on should billionaires exist, or should we have municipal ownership of public utilities, or how fast should we pass single payer, or anything like that. You have an insider-outsider divide among the moderates. You have people who are cherishing Washington experience, and you have people hungry for some outsider energy. And Buttigieg has made the argument that you look at recent Democratic success, the Democrats who have actually won the presidency are people who have not been in Washington too long, if at all. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. You have two governors, and you have Barack Obama, who just was in the middle of his first term. And Buttigieg would say they represented generational change to boot. And that's not a bad argument. What I think complicates his argument is that Buttigieg tests the outer limits of the outsider case. He's not a governor. He's not a one-term senator. He's not even a successful businessman like Donald Trump, or at least the perception of him being a successful businessman. He is a small city mayor. We've never taken the argument that far before. And so here you have Joe Biden, who just flat out took a dive in New Hampshire. Everyone's like, oh my God, he's in fifth place. Yeah, he said he was going to lose 4 days earlier. That's what happens when you say that. So he takes a dive. Who benefits? Not the outsider candidate, but the other Washington insider candidate. Klobuchar surges. She has a decent third, touching, just slightly under 20% if you're not rounding. And that further scrambles the moderate lane. And I actually tweeted out...
which leaves the door open for, Bloomberg, and leaves the door cracked for Joe Biden to come back.
Well, right. I actually wrote before New Hampshire saying, I don't think Biden's going to do better than fourth. And with that in mind, his best case scenario is a Klobuchar right. That would at least split the moderates. And here you got two moderates with no track record winning in the South, with weaknesses in the record with African Americans. Now, look, it is totally possible that Biden's poor showing is going to crack that firewall, and African Americans may go elsewhere. I'm not predicting what they're going to do, but if he is to have a chance for a comeback, this is it.
Right. Just to go back to where I started, if Pete had won, albeit narrowly, that means he would have won Iowa and New Hampshire.
In terms of delegates.
I'm sorry?
In terms of delegates. The Bernie folks still like to say he won Iowa in terms of votes.
Wouldn't... Oh, wait, so Bernie... So did Bernie technically win Iowa?
Well,
Pete did, right?
Technical wins for Iowa are generally based on state delegate equivalents, which Pete had a little more of, and in translating those state delegate equivalents to estimated national delegates, Pete is expected to get two more than Bernie.
Bernie won the first ballot or whatever.
He won the first ballot and the final alignment.
But in the way that, he did.
Yes.
Okay.
But the way those votes were distributed, since Pete did better in more lightly populated rural areas, that actually translated into a delegate edge.
Even someone who covers this professionally, because it was so muddled, and it took, how many days did it take before the actual...
It's not actually done.
Okay.
They're still recanvassing.
All right. If Pete had won New Hampshire, even narrowly, is it just me, or wouldn't the conversation be dramatically different today?
Well, it would, but I still think this insider-outsider divide would not be resolved with a slightly better Buttigieg performance, because even though Bloomberg is not a Washington insider, in the scenario where Biden and Klobuchar are just done, and they may be just done after South Carolina, mind you, you still have a outsider versus experience divide potentially, because Bloomberg's a mayor, yes, but a mayor of an 8 million person city, not a 100,000 person city. He will say, I have the experience to run Washington, this guy doesn't. And those who are with Biden and Klobuchar might say, I just can't get behind a South Bend mayor. It doesn't wash. Bloomberg is my next best option.
Yeah. By the way, my latest column at the Daily Beast is about how, well, you and I have talked about this on this show a little bit. the parallels that I'm seeing between 2016 on the Republican side and 2020 on the Democratic side. And not only do I cast Bernie Sanders, a guy who until recently wasn't really a Democrat. I mean, you could argue he's a democratic socialist. Mm-hmm. But my point is not just that Bernie Sanders could be sort of like taking over a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party, but that Mike Bloomberg could be too, in a different way.
Someone who wasn't a Democrat until very recently. He was a Republican mayor and then independent mayor,
right?
And only registered as a Democrat, a few years ago.
I mean, I think he had been a Democrat earlier in his life, but the point is he hasn't done it. He's not a traditional mainstream Democrat. He hasn't done it the way. He hasn't, and the way that he campaigned. I mean, he's a billionaire just like Trump. He didn't remember Trump did it more wholesale. He didn't really go to Iowa and campaign the same way that you would traditionally do, kiss the rings. So I do see parallels.
Well, absolutely. And Bernie is more of the Trump in this case, someone who doesn't appear to have majority support in the party, but may continue to rack up delegate wins with plurality support because the favorites of the establishment are divided, or more accurately, the establishment has defanged itself and refuses to throw its weight behind a single alternative that could stop the guy with intense but only plurality support.
And the political parties have been hollowed out, so they don't have the institutional or moral authority or statutory authority to do anything to stop him. The other candidates, I don't think it's just that we can't coalesce around them. I think it's that none of them are really great. There's not an obvious Barack Obama there that would command your respect or sort of your deference to them.
I mean, that could have been Biden if Biden won Iowa.
But if Biden were a better candidate.
Well, I mean, the two things are connected. I mean, and this goes back to something I've pointed out on past shows. The assumption that Biden was a weak candidate because of his ideology is wrong. Biden actually showed there was a healthy, moderate contingent in the party. And Buttigieg's rise was from appropriating Biden's argument. Buttigieg started by saying, I'm going to abolish electoral college, and Mike Pence is a hypocrite on Christianity. He wasn't talking about bipartisanship and bringing people together in the way that Biden led the bipartisan argument early on, took a lot of heat for it, but showed that there was an appetite for it. Buttigieg took that argument and articulated better. And Biden's weakness has been in inconsistent stump performances. From all accounts, poor attention to nuts and bolts of campaign organization. I mean, here's a case where in Iowa, I presume Biden left votes on the table in Iowa. There were more Biden voters out there who are not as amped up as a Bernie voter or a Buttigieg voter, and that's when you need a ground game to yank that person off the couch and get them to the polls. And he didn't build an operation that was designed to do that. So I think there's a world where even the inconsistent Biden builds the team that gets that kind of go over the finish line, and he didn't do it. And that also might be a problem for him in South Carolina, based on some additional reporting.
Now, a question I have for you, Bill, is I saw, is it Dave Wasserman at is it Rothenberg? Whatever.
Cook Political Report.
There you go. He was talking, I think it was him. Somebody was saying this morning, like, how doesn't this become a contested convention? Like, isn't this all lining up? And the one question I have for you is how the way that Democrats apportion delegates differs from Republicans. I mean, I've been drawing this parallel between what happened to Republicans in 2016 and what is happening to Democrats in 2020. And I do think there's a parallel, but the one difference is that Republicans, I believe, there were some proportional states, but I think almost all of them are winner take all, right? If you
in Republicans.
The
there was a date. The early states were not winner take all. And there was like a point in like mid-March when they all became winner take all.
So then you could kind of winnow the field, right? Democrats don't have as much of an incentive to winnow the field.
It's not as easy because you need if you clear 15% in a congressional district, you'll get something. You'll get some delegates, and you tend to get a bonus if you win the state. I think it's generally how it works in the party. If someone in the comments knows it more precisely than me, feel free to chime in. That's my basic understanding. So there is some natural winning effect that occurs. Biden and Warren zeroed out in New Hampshire because they were under 15%. If that kept going,
and Amy Klobuchar didn't. I don't think she won a single district,
but she cleared 15.
She came in a lot of them. And so,
well, it's by congressional. There's only two congressional districts in New Hampshire. I think she cleared 15 in both of them, so she gets delegates out of both of them.
Okay, so I guess I'm thinking of counties. I'm thinking of like the John King map or something where he was showing. Anyway, so Biden and Warren got 0 delegates.
Correct. So that system does induce some winnowing, and usually enough winnowing to avoid a contested convention, even when things get a little bit. And it also used to be the case that the superdelegates were being counted along the way, and that also magnified the leads for whoever was getting the most pledged delegates. Now the party has changed the rules. Superdelegates cannot vote on the first ballot, and so there's no media organization tallying superdelegates. And most congressional office holders and others who are superdelegates are keeping their mouths shut because they don't want to be seen as tipping the scales anyway. So it's a whole different dynamic than 2016, where Hillary was winning the pledged delegates, but that was really being magnified by her landslide in supers. You should write the column that responds to my column and others. I mean, there have been others. Like I know Jonathan V. Last had a controversial column at the Bulwark where he talked about how basically the Bernie bros are like Trump's. I think he used the term brown shirts online that got in some trouble. And then Chuck Todd quoted that, and everyone sort of yelled at Chuck Todd for using the phrase.
Chuck Todd in trouble for quoting it, which reminds me. I'll do a quick aside, but there was a time a few years ago when I worked at the Daily Caller, and the Daily Caller quoted Mike Tyson saying something very crude. It's my alarm clock telling me it's time to get up. And Bill's like, it's 11 a.m. on the East Coast. Mike Tyson said something very crude about Sarah Palin. And the Daily Caller reported it, and we reported it without weighing in. And we never said, like, what Mike Tyson said was horrible. Mike Tyson said this. And Greta Van Susteren, who at the time had a show, and Tucker did not. Tucker Carlson did not have a show. But if you ever want to watch a great video, Google this up, because Tucker went on and Greta starts giving him crap, and Tucker says, Greta, you know those punctuation marks that go around words? They're called quotes. They represent something someone else said, not us. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. And then he pointed out, well, Greta, if you think Mike Tyson's so bad, he was on your show a year ago. And you didn't ask him about being a convicted rapist. You basically sucked up to him the whole time. Very good show. But the point is, I don't get why Chuck Todd got so much heat for quoting Jonathan V.
We've got a little far afield from the initial question, Matt. So I want to bring it back to. I want to bring back the contested convention. And so I also want to point out, in terms of the collective action problem here, the difficulty for the establishment and the moderates to stop Bernie. This is also a theme of the piece I have, in the queue of Politico. Someone's got to move first. If there was to be a coalescing around a single candidate, your point is correct that if there's no standout candidate, then naturally creates that someone has to throw their weight around in order to make it happen. Now, one entity that could, in theory, do that, well, actually, let me stop there. James Carville was going on and on how the Democratic Party is losing its mind and Sanders is going to make it impossible to win the Senate. And then he goes up and endorses Michael Bennet, who got less than 1,000 votes in New Hampshire, which was not really the best way to use his platform to get his party around, a better alternative. Now, in Nevada, we have the powerful culinary union, 60,000 person union, mostly casino workers.
Yeah. The culinary union has gotten they've gotten more publicity from this show, Bill, than anywhere else.
Well, maybe the Nevada Independent, John Ralston's operation, which just broke the news last night that they have a flyer being distributed to its members, which lists the issue positions of the candidates, and when listing their healthcare positions for Bernie Sanders, it said Bernie would, quote, end culinary healthcare, unquote, which is a reference to the fact that he's for single payer, which would supersede the current healthcare plan that they have, which they love, which they think is amazing, and they don't want to give it up. So they're telling their members, in effect, don't go with Bernie, but as of yet, they haven't endorsed an alternative. If there was to be an entity that could start making some institutional moves towards a alternative Bernie, right now it is them, and as of this moment, they're not doing it. Do
you have any sense we've talked so much about South Carolina, right, and whether African Americans will still be there for Joe by the time he gets 2 weeks from now. Do you have any sense for Nevada where that's? We know about Bernie's problems, but African Americans
made up 13% of the caucus electorate in Nevada last time, and Latinos, I believe, it was 19%. So it's not zero. It's a very diverse state in that it has small majority of whites, but also ample African Americans and Latinos, but it's not Latino majority. It's not African American majority. You might do well with those constituencies and still lose the overall race. You better believe people are going to be looking at those entrance polls to see how Biden does with blacks in Nevada to predict how well he might do in South Carolina, even though they're very geographically different constituencies. Nevertheless, people will be reading those tea leaves. Now, what I think has been interesting about Nevada over the past two contests, since it's had a early slot on the calendar, is it's a caucus, and caucuses are sort of known for being good for the more left candidate. More committed activists tend to show up, and people are sort of assuming that this is good for Bernie. And again, Bernie may benefit from the same dynamic with split moderates helping him win with a plurality again, but the last two times, the person who got the most votes in Nevada was Hillary, who in both cases was more of the moderate choice vis-a-vis Obama and vis-a-vis Bernie Sanders. And she didn't win by a huge margin. In fact, in 2008, Obama claimed he got the extra national delegate, like Buttigieg in Iowa, based on where the votes were cast, and she won more of like a 5-point victory over Bernie in 2016. That just says to me that Nevada is more like a swing state within the Democratic Party. And the culinary union's hesitance towards Bernie is indicative of that. Now, they didn't endorse in 2016. They endorsed Obama in 2008. So I just don't think we can say easily what's going to happen in Nevada just yet. And we don't know what kind of impact that would have on South Carolina, which is a very different state demographically, majority black, clearly moderate. And even if Biden did poorly in Nevada, you still have to give him a shot in South Carolina because of the weak track records the other candidates have. Bernie does.
Nevada's a caucus, right?
Correct. Now, and there are very few caucuses left on the calendar. Most of the states have moved away from caucuses. There's only 4, Iowa being 1, Nevada being 2. Almost everything else from here forth is a primary.
So being a caucus, that's why presumably the culinary union is a big deal.
Correct. Now, granted, they endorsed Obama, and they didn't win the state for Obama outright, and they punted in 2016. So we don't want to say the culinary union, is game, set, match. But in a fractured field, clearly whoever they did endorse, if they did, would get a burst of attention and focus. But this does speak to the point you were initially making. What are the odds of a contested convention here? They're not zero, people.
What do you mean? Is it someone has to have? Is it 1,900 delegates?
I think it's 1991.
Okay, 1991 delegates to clinch
on the first ballot. Now, of course, if no one got that, and we went to a second ballot, that number goes up because the superdelegates come in.
Okay.
So we're really early.
Yeah. But based on that, and based on the way things have played out, how are you feeling in regards to the potential for a contested convention?
I think they're very strong because, I mean, the argument against a contested convention at this point, if you accept that, if you argue Bernie is the front runner. Bernie is not just the front runner because he got the most votes in the first two states. He has a money advantage with everybody except Bloomberg. He has a very committed following, and if the moderates remain divided, he will continue to rack up pluralities, which will, even if he is short of a majority, he would have a very strong claim to the nomination, and folks might well drop out before the first ballot and say, look, we don't want a contested convention. I release my delegates and I encourage them to vote with the person who got the most votes in the primary. I mean, that's a plausible scenario. But if and I should also add to that, there is an argument that Bernie does pretty well on second choice support in polls. So the notion he has a low ceiling might be false. Maybe Biden people and Warren people and Klobuchar's people, they wouldn't all go to Bernie, but if a piece went to Bernie of each, this is what happened with Trump. People assumed he had a low ceiling, right. Me being one of them, and his ceiling, he did have a ceiling. He never won more than 50% of the vote, or very rarely did before the point when Ted Cruz and John Kasich dropped out. But that ceiling kept inching up enough, and those again were winner-take-all delegate states by and large, which also helped matters convention-wise. If Bernie keeps inching up, I mean, he hasn't broken 30% yet. Maybe he does soon. Maybe even gets to 40%. At that point, will it seem unfair to deny him the nomination, even though he is technically short of a majority? The other argument is that maybe he does have a low ceiling. Maybe you're seeing that resistance right now. And if it comes down to Bernie and Buttigieg and Bloomberg representing the two wings of the moderate side, then Bernie might get denied. I mean, people assume that if it was Bernie, Warren, Biden, that Bernie and Warren would join forces and stop Biden at the convention. Well, it might not be that way at this point. If Warren's not getting any delegates at all, and Bernie's the only person on the left getting delegates, and the split's on the other side of things, they may well join forces to stop Bernie at a contested convention.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. You said earlier that Bernie is better at being the second choice than you might think. And I remember thinking in 2016, like, either you like Trump or you hate him, right? There's no he's my second choice, because he said horrible things about your favorite choice, number one. And how could Rubio be your first choice and then Trump be your second choice? That always seemed bizarre to me, but apparently it was more true than I would have imagined. Is there something that you have seen that would lead you to believe that Bernie is the second choice of a lot of people?
Well, I remain more skeptical that Bernie is like Trump in that respect, and I don't say this with high confidence. I'm not making flat predictions.
Yeah.
But Trump, I think the biggest resistance to Trump in the Republican Party was from evangelicals during the primary, and they were largely with Ted Cruz. The Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, moderate established Republicans were not that big in number. So folks who were with them initially weren't as offended by Trump's positions by and large. I mean, the poll numbers in the early Republican contests in regards to immigration showed that Trump had the argument from the get-go. So the reasons to resist Trump on his main issues weren't there in the party. There was some suspicion about him from the evangelicals, whether he was the real deal as a conservative, and they held out. And then Trump pandered like there was no tomorrow. Here are the judges I'm going to pick. And he had folks like, I think Huckabee. I think Huckabee was one of the first to tell people, hey, he's a good guy. He'll be with us. Forgive me if I'm getting that wrong, but that's my recollection. So he did work to get over the last hump after the primary process was over. Now, the argument that Bernie would be able to unite the party is that, by and large, his positions are not all that different from most people in the party. Moderates can be convinced that he'll be constrained by Congress, so it'll all be good in the end. And look, that argument might carry the day, but I think there is real resistance to democratic socialism inside the party. There are people who are very uncomfortable with that being the brand of the overall party. And I think, and Bernie doubles down on it so much. Trump did things to reduce resistance within the party to his candidacy. Now, maybe Bernie gets there, but he sure isn't doing it right now. And he
doesn't like to call people Bernie doesn't like to call people and wish them happy birthday. So is he going to want to call people and try to work out, smooth things over?
Well, okay. Some people say, Bernie's a master politician. You should respect the fact that he's gone as far as he has. He's not a dummy. He's not a crude ideologue. He knows how to play this game better than you think. And I think there is certainly some truth to that. But I also think that even if a Biden can't get up off the mat, or Buttigieg is too weak on the resume to really command a wing of the party, you still have Bloomberg with $1 gazillion who is not going to go away. Now, Bloomberg's got to have his vet, and it's starting to happen, and he could end up being wounded too. But with the resources he has, and I think an appetite for a non-socialist, I don't think this divide gets papered over very easily.
And Bloomberg, it's working. You throw a couple $100 million at a problem, and miraculously it solves itself. You're
going to be a liberal before this whole process is over. let's just throw money at our problems.
Well, it's his money. He earned it. It's not my money yet that he's spending. I guess some of it is. Or some of it might be. But it's his money. He earned it fair and square. But I guess my question is, what are you seeing in the polls? It seems like it's working, right? He's coming in second or third in some of these states now and nationally.
I think it's work. This is where I sort of feel for Biden here. I see anecdotally people that were with Biden who have been scared off, in part because of Trump's Hunter Biden play. You can't point to polling here, but there's certainly several articles where voters are telling reporters, this worries me, this is making him unelectable, Trump's broken him down, Trump has shown that Biden can't take the heat, that kind of thing. And some of those folks are then saying, well, Bloomberg, he's training his fire on Trump. He's showing he's got Trump's number. Trump's going to pee his pants against Bloomberg. And this is based on very limited data. Bloomberg has gotten to float above the process, minimal interaction with voters, very little media scrutiny, just ad after ad after ad. So I can look at a one-side ad and say, man, that ad works. You haven't seen the Trump ads against Bloomberg. You haven't seen what the other Democrats are going to say about him when he's on the debate stage. He just in the past week, he's had to defend himself on his stop and frisk comments, which are pretty bad. And my subjective opinion, based on what his campaign did, it wasn't that impressive of a response. It was a pretty weak apology. Again, people haven't felt this yet, but the way Trump has planted seeds of doubt for Biden in the minds of Democratic voters, he could very easily do. With Hillary Clinton, social media campaign targeting African Americans, saying Hillary Clinton called you super predators.
Yeah.
Trump's going to do that on Bloomberg with the stop and frisk comments. Now, you might say, well, I don't think it's going to work a second time around. Bloomberg has resources Hillary didn't have or what have you, but you haven't seen this play out in real time, though you have with Joe Biden and the Hunter Biden issue. So people are making judgments based on incomplete data.
As thin-skinned and irrational and sort of driven by the gut that Donald Trump is, it does seem like somebody has built a pretty amazing tech team and a very sophisticated tech operation.
Well, I don't know if you've seen the Atlantic story that McKay Coppins just did, the $1 billion disinformation campaign to reelect the president. It is a disturbing expose at how deep this operation runs and how much it can warp our understanding of what's going on around us. This is why I think it's legitimate to look at how Biden responded to Trump. And if your conclusion is, I don't think he responded well, that's a legitimate factor to consider in making your judgment. I just don't think we have had that experience with most of the other candidates. So you can say, I now know how all of them would do in this circumstance. Because it could very well be that they'll all do poorly because you're constantly put into these lose-lose situations. What is it that Biden should have done that was any different? Should he have had a longer 60 minutes interview where he talks to Hunter Biden for 45 minutes and goes through every painstaking detail? Would that have been better, or would that have just been more being put on the defense?
Trump is incredibly adept at doing what he does, at trolling, at tearing down people. We don't have to get into the whole thing about wrestling with the pig. It just makes the pig happy, and you end up muddy or whatever. It's all true, but I would say this. Trump is not, all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscient. He can be beaten. And part of the problem is that we haven't had the political figure who could do it. And I think that one could imagine if you had someone with Joe Biden's experience and resume and sort of physical presence, but Pete Buttigieg's energy and charisma and eloquence, I think that person might be able to stand up to Trump. But we don't have anybody in this field. Now, Amy Klobuchar is an interesting case. She's not the most charismatic person I've ever seen. She's not, I don't think she's a rock star like a Barack Obama was. But Trump hasn't faced somebody quite like her. And I think she is an interesting question mark of how he would do. Well, if it would work. He would try to destroy her, but if it would work.
Well, I wrote when Doug Jones won the Alabama Senate race at the end of 2017, that this makes a case. I'm not saying it is the case. It's an open and shut case, but it makes a case for a generic Democrat to go up against Trump.
Right.
Bland, no oddball personality quirks, no weird resume thing. It's just, I'm just a normal person. I'm going to bring back normal things. I'm not going to rock the boat too far one direction or the other. And that is the best way to go up against him. I think in this field, Klobuchar is the closest thing to a generic Democrat. And I think that is an argument for her nomination. Having said that, you don't think Trump's going to be hitting her on her abusive staff treatment? You don't think Trump's going to use, you may not know about this, but this came up on The View yesterday, and there was some other news coverage around it before that.
You're suggesting I don't watch The View religiously? For the sake of the audience, why don't you describe, what happened?
Well, the AP did an investigation on, she was a DA before she was a senator, and she prosecuted a black teenager for murder, put him in jail for life, and the AP has done an expose saying that this evidence was very flimsy, and suggesting that he got railroaded in part because of the work that Klobuchar did. And she was, the Minneapolis NAACP and the local Black Lives Matter chapter said she should quit the race. And on The View yesterday, I mean, this is during the time New Hampshire was voting, one of the co-hosts, Sunny Hostin, just absolutely grilled her. And Klobuchar's responses were not great. She said the case should be reviewed.
That's the thing about going up against Trump. It's like he can do anything. And, that's just Trump being Trump. Well, of course he killed that person, but, it's not 100, but if you got a speeding ticket, and look, maybe what Amy Klobuchar did is egregious. I don't know. This is a big surprise. I didn't see The View. But, you don't get a pass for an indiscretion and that you made. That's the end of the world. You're disqualified. You're horrible. It doesn't even have to be you. It could be your son who did something, right? But Trump, it's got to be incredibly frustrating for the people who actually do go up against.
Well, of course. I mean, this is why Democrats are terrified. It's why Trump's in their head. It's why they can't get their heads around who really is electable and who isn't. Yeah. And it's fundamentally unfair, but it's reality. I saw someone say, "Oh, well, Trump can't hit Bloomberg on stop and frisk because he's for stop and frisk." Of course he can. It doesn't even have to be coming out of his mouth. It could be on social media targeting African-American voters. It doesn't have to be even Trump saying it on the stump. So
what Bloomberg should do, and this is the problem that Democrats have, is that there's a way to answer that question in a strong way that could win over sort of some middle America voters, but you probably can't do that if you're afraid about woke Twitter or winning a Democratic primary.
Well, this is where the African-American vote is interesting and why we can't easily predict where it's going to go. Over the course of the year, most African-Americans, older African-Americans, at least in polling and what anecdotal reports we see on the ground, stood by Biden when he was attacked for writing the 94 crime bill, comments he made around that bill or earlier crime bills, and opposing involuntary busing in the 70s, and saying it was right to work with segregationists when he was a senator in the 70s. A lot of African Americans seem to say, we know Biden, we know it's not the totality of his record, we understand that, in the real world, prime ministers have to make difficult choices in order to get things done, and we're not going to hold that against him. Now, does a Buttigieg or a Klobuchar, I think it's Klobuchar, I'm trying to get it right, I think it's Klobuchar.
Oh, please, Bill. We're not introducing a new pronunciation.
Do they get the same slack when they have never campaigned in the South? Klobuchar represents a state that has a 4% black electorate. South Bend's got a bigger black electorate, but a good number of those folks aren't happy with the way he governed the city. We're mad that he fired the African-American police chief and forced out the African-American fire chief. and he's otherwise not very well known around the country. Or do those folks say, younger blacks like younger Latinos seem to be with Bernie? They are more ideologically on the left. Do the older ones say, you know what? I think Bernie's a bridge too far. I don't know who this Amy person or this Peace person is, but or Bloomberg for that matter. But I think Bernie is dead in the water, and so I'll suck up whatever I gotta suck up in their records. That I can't say just yet. Yeah. But this is why Biden has the potential. I mean, he can prosecute these subjects in theory in South Carolina. Now, he started to go nuclear on Pete over the weekend, and they seem to kind of pull back a bit. So I don't know if Biden has that sense of the jugular that he might need if he's going to survive this.
I think it's interesting that there's not more attention being paid to the historic nature of Pete Buttigieg being the first openly gay candidate to go as far as he is going. I mean, right?
I see some of that in the media today.
Nothing compared to Barack Obama being the first American candidate.
I mean, it does, I think, speak to the nature of those identities. I mean, race you see, gender you see, sexual orientation you have to talk about. Someone in Iowa went to caucus for Pete and did not know he was gay, found he was gay at the caucus and asked to take her vote back. So it's not as uniformly known as you might think. Now, Pete has been talking about it. I feel like Pete wasn't talking about it that much early on. I think he's leaning into it a bit more. He has shout outs to his husband more on the stage.
Last night, early on in the victory speech.
Right. So I suspect it will get talked about more and more. And look,
what do we call it if it's not a victory speech? What do we call that?
It's a concession speech. It's a big, but look, Bill Clinton conceded New Hampshire by calling himself the comeback kid. Obama conceded New Hampshire with the "Yes We Can" speech, which became one of the most impactful political videos of all time. There are ways to concede and ways not to concede. But I would still call them all concession speeches.
Well, I think we've covered a lot. What else you got?
That's all I got. I gotta say, I do feel like this has
been great preparation for my speech. I'm
good. I'm always here to help. But I do think there is a significant unity problem in the party. And these early states are not resolving it. I mean, I'm not saying that means Democrats are flat out doomed, but I've always maintained the way Trump wins is through Democratic disunity, and we are seeing significant disunity in this process so far.
Yeah. I agree. It's kind of just amazing to me. This is how the stars have aligned for Trump so many times. And they appear to be doing so again. Now, anything could happen, but it doesn't seem like there's now I know that turnout was low in Iowa.
It was higher in New Hampshire.
It was a little bit better in New Hampshire.
It surpassed 2008, I believe.
But nothing really jumping out to me as a great sign that Democrats have their act together.
Well, no, and part of the argument against Bernie of being able to really trumpet his win is that these are still low pluralities. He hasn't cracked 30%. He hasn't cracked 27%, I believe. So that doesn't really feel like revolution is coming if you're winning with that low a margin and a share. But just to not be completely pessimistic here, it is very possible that all this stuff doesn't matter at the end, that Trump is so unpopular that he can't do anything to save himself, that Democrats will unify strictly on the basis of being anti-Trump more so than 2016, and they'll get over whatever it is they have to get over at the end of the day. I can't know that this juncture.
They've got a great economy to deal with. They've got the fact that the unemployment rate's incredibly low. They've got the fact that Trump hasn't really started any new wars, but he just keeps killing terrorists.
I mean, there are arguments for Trump winning the election. I'm not disputing that at all.
that for some reason in modern history we just keep re-electing presidents?
I just want to say that you can't assume permanent disunity based on disunity in the early contest. It is possible to snap together when you have to. I do worry that the longer this drags out, the harder it is to do that, especially if it's playing out on the convention floor. But, weird things happen, and it may be that the enemy of the enemy is my friend, and Democrats will get that message when the time is right.
Yeah. Interesting times we live in, Bill Scher. Let me just give a shout out to the movie Parasite, who Best Picture.
Was that your favorite going in?
Was.
You predicted Parasite.
Well, what happened is I did Bill Butler and I did a podcast where we spent an hour and 20 minutes talking about each of the Best Picture nominees. I think we came away. Bill convinced me that 1917 was more likely to win, but Bill and I were both clear in saying that Parasite should win, and I was happy to see that it did. So,
excellent.
If there's one, and now I've seen on the flight out to California, I watched Jojo Rabbit again for the second time. Some of them I've seen twice now, but if there's only one movie that you need to see, go see Parasite.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will see you next week. We won't have Nevada's not till the Saturday after. I think they debate in Nevada on Wednesday, so maybe we should talk after the debate.
And I've negotiated with my union that I don't work Saturdays, so you're on your own for that. But we can talk about it during business hours, during the week. I'm perfectly open to doing that. So I look forward to that. Let's see. Check us out on Twitter at DMZ Show. Usually you'll know when this episode comes up. We will tweet or retweet the Suits at Blogging Heads and let you know, to come listen or watch us. So I'm going to go talk about this. And Bill Scher, you'll be whispering in my ear as I do.
Okay. Well, good. Good luck at your talk and enjoy the sunshine.
Yeah, my lighting's probably better than ever right now. All right, have a good one.
Take care.
Guys.